Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to welcome you to this dedicated morning on sustainable transport here at the SDG Pavilion, which UN DESA has been organizing over the last 6 conference of parties at the UNFCCC. We have this morning 3 dedicated back-to-back events, really dedicated to transport, to make sure we have attention to transport, which is the most important, I hope, for you and for us. The topic related to the climate action and achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations Decade of Sustainable Transport was declared by UN General Assembly last year. General Assembly also requested our Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UN DESA, to prepare an implementation plan for the decade in collaboration with the UN regional commissions. The DESA is currently actively consulting many stakeholders to hear their views on what should be included in the plan. We are delighted to have the numerous key stakeholders here today joining in this conversation to discuss how we can best use the upcoming UN decade to boost sustainable transport, climate action, and all other SDGs in the best possible way. Without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our opening remarks speakers. First, Mr. Lee Jun-ha, Under-Secretary General of UN DESA. Mr. Lee has already left this the conference party, but because of the importance, he left his message here. So I'd like to play the video to show his message.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address you at the SDG Pavilion in Baku to promote Sustainable Transport Day. Sustainable transport is a crucial cross-cutting factor that has a growing impact on the achievement of the SDGs. We need transport systems that are clean, affordable, accessible, and just. However, transport is a sector with the lowest share of the renewable energy use. Nearly a quarter of the global greenhouse gas emissions come from the transport, and these emissions are projected to grow significantly in the coming years. We need more efficient vehicles running on electricity and the new zero carbon fuels. And we need to look at the transport sustainability beyond the sector's energy mix. We need better urban planning, increase the use of the public transport, rail, walking, and cycling. We need more resilient and smart infrastructure and seamless transport solutions powered by better use of the new and existing technologies. Such actions will elevate our climate ambitions and drive us towards a more sustainable and inclusive societies. Dear colleagues, the momentum around sustainable transport is growing. Just last year, the General Assembly declared 26 November as the World Sustainable Transport Day and set the first UN decade of the sustainable transport to start in 2026. Member states have also called for a 3rd UN conference on sustainable transport. The Department of the Economic and Social Affairs, UN DESA, is building on this momentum. We are working with regional commissions, other UN system partners, and the relevant stakeholders to develop an implementation plan for the decade that will bring together the voices and actions of all relevant transport actors. We have held consultations with member states on the plan in October and launched a global call for inputs that will remain open until January next year. We urged all interested stakeholders to share your thoughts and views and also the suggestions with us by submitting your inputs online. The UN Decade for Sustainable Transport should address transport in a balanced manner. All sectors, maritime, inland transport, and aviation, should be included in our efforts. We must account for the interlinkages between our policy aims to ensure that choices in the transport sector tackles issues such as climate, road safety, air pollution, health, access, and affordability. The implementation plan should also pay special attention to ensuring that our transport systems are inclusive, catering to the needs and the safety of all transport users. Ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to hearing your views today on how we can make the best use of the upcoming UN Decade of Sustainable Transport to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I now invite Mr. Dimitri Mariasyan, Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, dear colleagues. It's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the regional commissions, which, as the Undersecretary General just mentioned, are responsible, together with UN DESA, for drafting the implementation plan of the Sustainable Transport Decade. But before I come to that, let me really congratulate UN DESA on, of course, hosting the SDG Pavilion, but more importantly, dedicating this day to sustainable transport, a topic that is more important than ever. And we're exactly 1 week before the Sustainable Transport Day, so we can start the celebration already now. But unfortunately, there is not much to celebrate just yet, because as important as transport is for the global economy and for the society, it really makes things move, literally. It is also a source of both almost a quarter of carbon emissions, but also a source of pollution. It's a source of noise. It's a major contributor to air quality problems, and so on. So the multiple positive effects of transport need to be looked at together with the externalities that transport as the global circulatory system creates. And of course, when we say transport, we do not talk about machinery. We talk about people. We talk about the effect it has on communities, both urban and rural, around the world. And this impact can be deep, and as the world tries to decarbonize, transport will play a big role. It's in this spirit that the UN announced the Sustainable Transport Decade, which will start in 2026. It's a commitment to transform the transport systems globally, and it's an opportunity to shift from incremental progress to systemic change. I represent the UN Economic Commission for Europe. It's one of the 5 regional commissions, but it's also carrying a special role as we happen to host most of UN's regulations on inland transport. And in that sense, we are something like ICAO is for air aviation and IMO is for maritime. We carry the regulatory responsibility for road and rail. And very often you don't realize, but when you drive a car, you are using hundreds of UNECE vehicle regulations and standards. When you're seeing road signs and signals on the road, this is also UNECE, and I could go on. Now, what is as important as the many conventions that we host is that member states in our Inland Transport Committee, which is the body of UNECE working on inland transport, have decided it's time to bring climate objectives to the center of our work. And with this spirit, they adopted earlier this year the first ever decarbonizing inland transport strategy for the Inland Transport Committee. Well, you may say, Dmitry, how many strategies has the UN come up with in the past 70 plus years? And I'll tell you, this one is special because this is not just a set of declarations. We will actually need to go convention by convention, vehicle regulation by vehicle regulation, and analyze revise, and eventually shift to completely new approaches when it comes to regulating inland transport from the perspective of climate objectives. And I say climate objectives because though the strategy is called decarbonization, so mostly mitigation, it's also including very important elements on climate change adaptation. At the core of the strategy is the avoid, shift, improve approach, which is encouraging avoiding unnecessary transport. And this is where urban planning will be such a critical element. Improving the efficiency of vehicles, infrastructure, and operations. This is where, for example, the new generation of vehicle regulations come into play. And then, of course, maximizing the resilience and reducing environmental impact. This is where sustainable management of corridors, of land corridors, will be a key topic of attention. With the strategy in our hands, we are planning to join forces with ICAO and IMO, and the first preview of this is tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Please join us for the special UN system side event where the three modes of transport for the first time will get together. IMO, ICAO, and UNECE Inland Transport Committee co-organizing it to talk about the pathway for decarbonizing the three modes of transport. We hope we can make a real contribution to the decade's activities. But before we do that, we need to consider the context in which this is happening. First, the climate challenges are not going to wait for us to come up with the perfect strategy. So we need to move on creating these specific solutions for various modes of transport at the same time as we fight climate emergencies. We analyzed just since the beginning of 2024, over 40 countries which are parties to our conventions on transport have experienced major flooding events that they had not experienced before, or on a scale that they had not experienced before. We're talking about hundreds of highways, bridges, and tunnels being flooded. So as we tackle decarbonization, we'll need to tackle resilience building and infrastructure planning in a very different way. Secondly, we need to remember the social dimension of sustainability when planning transport. And here, one topic which I won't be able to talk about in detail now is road safety. Because designing a green transport system that is not safe is, well, designing for failure. We need to design for success and design in such a way that it will simultaneously address the climate prerogative and save lives, or prevent unnecessary loss of life and unnecessary injury. And then finally, all this has to make economic sense. If this doesn't work as a business model, it will not work. And so we hope that as we draft the implementation for the decade, we can get together with all of you, with a wide range of stakeholders, many of who are here today, and come up with a plan that actually addresses these three elements of the sustainability puzzle. Here, UN DESA leadership will be essential. We from UNECE, as part of the regional commissions in contribution, will try to do our best. We'll need to have the civil society and the academia on board. We'll need to have very important stakeholders from the private sector on board, and we'll need to take the best use of the capacities of each of these stakeholders as we move forward with the decade implementation. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to a very productive conversation today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mariasin. Now we are moving to the panel discussion. We have two panels today. I'd like to invite first panelist to come over here. Let me call upon their name here. Ms. Mana Walters, Deputy Director, Climate Strategy and Coordination, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom. Thank you. Yes, any place, please. Mr. Faris Aliyev, Head of the Transport Policy Department at the Ministry of Digital Development and Transport, Republic of Azerbaijan. Welcome. Mr. Nicolas Peltier-Tiberge, Global Director, Transport, the Transport Global Department, World Bank. Welcome. And Mr. Jari Kapila, Head of Secretary General's Office, International Transport Forum. Welcome. I hope you can hear me. You need to do a headphone or... Okay. All right. That works. Thank you very much. So we are getting into the decade. And this is exciting. And together with regional commissions, DESA, and of course, everybody's inputs, we'll be constructing a very ambitious implementation plan. But it has to work. And then, Deputy Executive Secretary just mentioned we have to design for success, not for failure. So we have two questions to guide your sort of inputs on this one. What would a fully sustainable, climate-friendly transport system could look like in the future? In what ways can the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport boost our efforts towards more sustainable transport and effective climate action in an integrated fashion? So those are the two guiding questions, and maybe we can get started with Anna.
Thank you. Is that on? You can hear me. Okay. It sounds really quiet. I can barely hear myself. Thank you. And thank you for so much for inviting the UK to speak here today on this really critical topic. And I think as was just so beautifully outlined earlier by our previous speaker, transport is clearly critical for our ability to achieve the emissions reductions that we need to achieve. And in addition to the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from transport, it being well over 20%, it's also the fastest growing emitting sector globally. So it's really critical that we are able to engage on this. I think just in terms of the two questions that you outlined to us on the question of what would a fully sustainable climate-friendly transport system look like in future, I think from the UK's perspective, it needs to be really a few things. It needs to be a system that is risk-informed, that's based on data and evidence, that it's backed by the necessary investment and human capital that can implement, manage and maintain an inclusive, low-carbon, resilient transport service. And it needs to be, in our view, a really multimodal and active travel system, which can also incorporate transport, walking, cycling, and other forms of transport that is sufficient. And I think, as we said earlier, it's safe for users. So I think that would be the first point that we would need to make. And then I think, in terms of how the UN Decade can boost our efforts, this decade is crucial, clearly, for aligning the climate and development agendas, ensuring that transport initiatives are climate compatible and resilient. And we think that the UN in particular can really help to drive that coordination, as we were just saying earlier, across all of the different stakeholders in the UN system and among business and other stakeholders to really harness that potential to get that sustainable system in place. And I think very critically for us as well, we want to see transport properly incorporated into the NDCs. And there's a number of steps that the UK is taking to try and make sure that happens, and support that we're providing through various routes and research and so on to try and make that a possibility in of course, in our own plans and the plans of other countries as well. So perhaps I'll stop there and pass back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear delegates, distinguished partners, esteemed colleagues, before starting my speech, I would like to extend my great gratitude to all the partners for making this remarkable event happen. I believe this meeting within the framework of COP29 will contribute significantly to advancing our shared goals by fostering deeper collaboration and aligning our transport strategies with global climate objectives. The discussions and initiatives raised here will provide valuable insights, enabling us to further accelerate the adoption of sustainable transport technologies and enhance regional and global connectivity. Today's forum is of special importance to be devoted to the transport sector at the eve of Sustainable Transport Day. As we all know, in 2015, when the world leaders came together in New York to adopt this sustainable development agenda, including 17 SDGs, there was no dedicated SDG for transport. But last year, the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport was announced and launched. I think that has a reason, because transport sector is applying for almost a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. Needs to be paid more attention, and since urbanization accelerates and population continues to grow, the demand for mobility intensifies, placing even greater strain on our environment. Acknowledging this reality is a crucial first step towards meaningful change. However, the transport sector is not solely a source of emissions. It also serves as a powerful driver of economic growth and social cohesion. By fostering efficient, accessible, and sustainable transport systems, we can strengthen connections, create jobs, and promote equality. Investments in decarbonized transport solutions such as electric vehicles, improved public transportation, and active mobility can establish a robust framework that supports both our economies and societies. Moreover, enhancing the resilience of our transport systems is essential in the face of climate change. We must design infrastructure capable of withstanding extreme weather events while ensuring that our systems can operate effectively under stress. So I think the transformation for sustainable transport must be accelerated through increased national efforts, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and international cooperation. And talking about the future of the transport, I'd say it should be a fully sustainable, climate-friendly transport system of the future, which is seamlessly interconnected, driven by zero-emission endeavor, and powered by renewable energy sources. It would integrate electric, hydrogen, and other clean energy vehicles across public, private, and private sectors. A robust digital infrastructure would support smart, optimized routing to reduce congestion and energy waste, while prioritizing shared and active transport options like cycling and walking to reduce dependency on single occupancy vehicles. On the global level, progress towards this vision includes advancements in electric vehicle technology, widespread adoption of renewable energy sources, and international cooperation to establish green transport corridors. So 4 major columns for pillars for the transport system, I think, is eco-friendly vehicles. It should be LRTs, e-buses, EVs, and etc. And renewable energy sources like solar, wind power, and etc. More wide application of ITS, like intelligent transport systems, and smart traffic monitoring systems. And last but not the least, a data-driven approach, which I think we should have the collection of the carbon footprint for sectors and for the citizens to enable that we have continuous monitoring. If I may, I would like to say a few words about the national programs we conducted in our country, both at national and global level. As you know, Azerbaijan is located at the intersection of the east and west. That's why the international corridors are very important for us. So Azerbaijan acting as a transit country, as a gateway between Europe and Asia. After recent geopolitical changes, the middle corridor, the Trans-Caspian corridor, got more importance, and we are the railway transportation stands in the heart of it. As you know, railway is the least, let's say, pollutant in the transport sector, by applying for less than 2%. So we are trying to encourage and enhance our transport systems in order to build a more resilient infrastructure and to contribute to seamless connectivity in the Trans-Caspian corridor, and I think it's already bringing positive results. We're also developing a digital transport logistics information system, which considers all the documentation programs and bringing the operations to the digital network where all participants of the transport operations may interact with each other. So it includes pre-arrival application for license and permits, like application for customs clearance and other things, which we think in the future will help for the acceleration of border crossing procedures and etc. We're also trying to match our policies with the UN CFACT standards, especially in terms of the border crossing and transport procedures. So I think in this direction we should be thankful to ITF as well. Recently we have received this guidelines from ITF regarding the NDCs, like how to build up your own system, how to match the transport policy and strategies to meet this criteria. And on the national level, just a few words about the national level. Well, we have a mobility transformation project which aims to reduce the carbon footprint to achieve the emissions of less than 600 kg of CO2 per citizen, and enhancement of metro, railway and bus systems, private vehicles, micro-mobility solutions, parking facilities, priority lanes, bus network optimization, and reduce the road traffic fatality to 4 out of 100,000 people. While doing all these efforts, I think one challenge for the government is to consider the cost of green transition. As you know, the green is expensive, and already Azerbaijani government is taking strong will to support this endeavor. We have, in 2019, we accepted a new policy regarding the import of the electric vehicles as well as the hybrid and the other, let's say, eco-friendly vehicles, and they are exempted from import tax and VAT. So the government is already waiving or relinquishing some of these revenues to support the process. And this year we started the program of purchasing of e-buses. As you may have seen already in Baku transport system, we have 160 electric buses imported from BYD, a Chinese manufacturer, and we are starting to localization of the electric buses production in Azerbaijan. But most of this is done by state budget, so at the expense of state resources. So it's important to have, I think it's important to find the balance between natural and voluntary transition and stimulated and regulated transition. So in this essence, I think the intervention and support of UN Decade for Sustainable Transport is very important, because we should come up with the solutions, how to instill the idea of sustainability to the minds of the people and society, and encourage all the stakeholders to be part of this journey, and to have the reward and punishment system, like limit and tax the non-eco-friendly activities. And last is to foster the green initiatives by supporting the startups, green innovation incubators and brain centers in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nicolas?
Yes, thank you very much. And I first want to thank UN DESA for bringing us together. I think it's very important to elevate the visibility of sustainable transportation, and this is a good opportunity to do that. So let me say that I fully share what has been said by the previous speakers and by the Undersecretary General on how to frame what sustainable transport should be. It should be clean, it should be safe, it should be inclusive, and it should be resilient. No? And on top of this, it will have to be accessible to all. And just to give a little bit of an idea of the magnitude of the issue there, we estimate that there are about 2.2 billion people in the world today that are still missing access to public transportation, and about 1.1 billion people who are missing access to a simple climate resilient road. No? So this is about half of the world's population, and we really need to keep this in mind to make sure that we do not create or amplify this divide between the global north and the global south on access to sustainable transport. One example of what could happen, if we start the electrification of transport in the global north is accelerating. But if that leads to the shipping of all the combustion engine vehicles to the developing world, I mean, we are not going to solve the problem. We're just going to displace it. Now, let's go back a little bit to this 4 dimension. I mean, the clean, I think, is many speakers have highlighted it. About a quarter of global emissions keep rising, keeps accelerating. There's no way we can achieve our climate ambitions if we don't decarbonize transport. I very much share what my colleague Dimitri said about this avoid, shift and improve framework. I think that's a nice way to frame what needs to be done. and this requires some collaboration between transport and urban, densifying cities, bringing people closer to their jobs so they have to travel less, shifting to cleaner modes of transport like rail, like public transportation, and then improving the carbon intensity of each mode, for example, like through electrification. The transport needs to be safe, and we have the specific SDG 3.6 that tracks road safety. There are still 1.2 million people in the world dying from car crashes, and I must say, we are not on track to reach the SDG objective of halving those fatalities by 2030. So that we really need to ramp up our ambitions also on making transport safe, inclusive, because we cannot keep half of the world population from having access to sustainable transport. There are some research showing that in some regions of the world, the lack of safe public transport services is the main reason why women do not enter the labor force. And so it's great when we build a mass transit investment like the Quito Metro that the World Bank is financing, that gives access to that brings about 800,000 jobs within an hour of commute to the population of Quito in Ecuador. But the reason why this project was so successful is that it also paid attention to making sure that it's safe, so that female users can use it, and not only but also vulnerable users like people with disabilities. So this is what we mean by inclusive transport. And finally, it has to be resilient. I think the COVID crisis has surfaced a number of vulnerabilities in logistic supply chains, and this is why there are all these discussions about these alternative corridors. Azerbaijan is looking at the middle corridor, and there are many other trade routes that we need to further develop. For landlocked countries, having access, only one access to the sea may not be sufficient. If something happens, you need to think about the plan B. So this notion of resilient transport is also equally important, and that's obviously connected to the adaptation agenda. This will require a lot of resources. There are lots of estimates from 244 billion to 944 billion a year through 2030. The range is enormous. I mean, this is why this COP is so important to find the resources that will be needed. And so to conclude, I really welcome this initiative of the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to elevate the profile of sustainable transport. This notion about integrating the various transport modes is very, very much welcome, because there are synergies between the various modes. For example, if you start electrifying land transport, you may free some biofuels, and those biofuels may be relevant for sustainable aviation fuels also. So you thinking holistically can help also on the decarbonization agenda. Tracking progress and building accountability, standardizing, monitoring, and obviously these are also some of the things that the UN Decade of Action can help achieve. Disseminating innovation, scaling up, and building partnerships and collaboration. We absolutely need collaboration among ourselves, collaboration with the private sector. Public finance won't be sufficient to achieve our ambitions there, and so we need to rally and to find those innovative financing, blended finance, risk-sharing instruments that can help to scale up our ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jerry, over to you.
Thank you very much. And it's both easy and hard to be the last speaker in the panel after all those interventions. So let me start with the second question first. What can the Decade of Action actually do? And I think what it can do is to help us to create a joint vision for what the sustainable transport should be in the future. And then I come to what I see as a dream, or the So it is. I feel like when I listen to my colleague panelists here and UNEC presentation, there's already a joint vision. It is safe, it is clean, it is resilient, and it provides equal access to opportunities to everyone. It also provides job opportunities. I think something we should not forget. Transport is a major employer in the world, so that is also one part of the sustainable transport. More concretely, I think it prioritizes walking and cycling, public transport to bridge some of the mobility gaps for people from different groups, different ages, different genders, etc., etc. It's based on sharing assets. I believe strongly in shared mobility, also on the freight side, to reduce the excess miles traveled. So we use the assets that we have as effectively as possible. Where needed, passenger vehicles, passenger transport is based on renewable energy. Hard to electrify sectors, maritime aviation, are using advanced sustainable fuels. I think the second part, so that's sort of the vision, I guess, what is the sustainable transport of the future. But there are several pathways to achieve this future. But I strongly believe that waiting is not one of those pathways. So there's really, the delayed action will result in much, much higher economic, environmental and social costs than anything else. So going back again, I think what the Decade of Action can do is also, we have the vision, it should focus on delivering that vision through immediate action. So I always a bit afraid of the word decade. We don't have a decade. We have to work now. But what the Decade of Action can help us is to get us focused on the task at hand. And I think this is where we can all roll our sleeves and start using the tools and knowledge we already have and put those in practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. This is not to wait 10 years, but to put in place, appropriate, urgently, the, step-by-step actions. So at the end of the decade, we'll actually get there as opposed to waiting for decade. Now we are opening up for question and answers or comments from the floor. Would you be able to raise your hand? And then when you do so, if you can identify yourself as well. So over to you.
Hi, my name's Jeremy Anderson from the International Transport Workers Federation. And thank you to all the panelists. I agree that this is a major opportunity. And some of you on the panel know me, and you often hear me answer questions about the inclusion of workers. And I was very pleased to hear Jari talk about job creation. And I want to talk about a slightly different angle of this. How do we really amplify the opportunity for good job creation in the UN decade? I think we're at a moment where progressive climate politics are under major threat. We're not seeing many governments around the world at the moment win votes from progressive climate policies. We're actually seeing the opposite. So we have a lot to do to build support, particularly amongst, dare I say, the global working class community for progressive climate policies. And I think good job creation in sustainable transport is a way to do this. So how do we amplify this aspect of the UN decade?
Would anybody like to take the questions? Yes.
I'm happy to start on the nexus between jobs and transport is something we need to invest more because there are a lot of opportunities there, and there is a little bit of an untold story. What I was mentioning earlier about how a mass transit system can increase access to jobs is a major contribution of transport to, and I'm not sure it's very well known. In big cities, I mean, the World Bank currently is working in about 30 cities around the world on mass transit investments, and in every single one of them, now thanks to big data and we are able to track how jobs become accessible. I mean, the number of jobs that are accessible within an hour of commute is huge. I mean, you move the needle by several percentage points, no? So that's the big win in terms of the jobs agenda. Now, the creation of jobs within the sector is equally important, and as we are transitioning to different technologies, that can open a lot of opportunities. You know, the assembly of electric vehicles and electric 2- and 3-wheelers, which is a market segment that is growing very fast right now in the global south, can be perfectly manufactured locally. Countries like Rwanda, like Benin, like Togo, like Burkina Faso are right now developing this. You have a lot of startups that are starting to enter this market on the African continent. Now the batteries will take more time, more sophisticated, but the assembly itself can generate a job. And then there are also the participation of women in the workforce. No, this is something also that is growing fast. No.
Perfect. Yeah, you would like to say?
Well, Nicola actually just put my point as well about women in transport sector. I think this is one of the things, and it starts from education. It starts from women on STEM, getting them the women into the workforce already early in advance, and I think that's a huge opportunity also for transportation sector.
Very good. Any more questions, comments from the floor? None? For now? Okay. Please, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm from Mali, and the presentation was very interesting, actually. And you mentioned like Burkina Faso, you have in Africa for renewable energy. I just wanted to ask if you have in Mali or you have a representative in Mali. I just want to know, or if you have planning to have some project over there. Thank you.
We do have a very interesting program in Mali, in the transport sector. Mali is a specific country because it's a landlocked country, and transport is absolutely essential to connectivity, and you have different options in terms of corridors. And so there is a very interesting program on those connectivity corridors, also on rural accessibility, and also on urban transport in big cities. So I would be very happy to connect you to our team who is working in Bamako.
Thank you very much. Any additional points, questions? If not, I would like to invite, final words from the panelists, maybe, 30 seconds or 1 minute each to leave before I invite the second panel. Maybe from the other order, would you like to start?
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be in this panel. I think I heard a couple of important insights from the fellow colleagues, and I think this UN Decade of Sustainable Transport provides an invaluable platform for all of us to learn from each other and to align our goals and share the experience. I'd like to point some stuff regarding the previous question also, how about the creation of the jobs, for example. So once we started this green transition, we did not limit ourselves to just import electric buses, for example. We started a localization program of e-buses, which means opening a new factory. Also, it's SKD, but it's creating new jobs, a transfer of the innovative technology, increasing the competition in the market, and etc. Also about the digital logistics information system, which I saw that we are starting in the transport, both for national and the international levels. So the government does not although government will own this platform, but it will keep the room for the private sector as well to offer their services and to be part of this endeavor. So I think there are lots of things to learn and discuss through these platforms. And I think the participation of UN DESA in these processes will also give us more like power to communicate our ideas and share our beliefs with the society as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's not much to add. I think the decade of action is, I think it's the encouragement of inclusive participation is super important from different partners beyond the governments, the private sector. A colleague from Azerbaijan mentioned private sector, NGOs, all of us working together. And I think this international collaboration and the implementation plan for the decade can help really to share those best practices and achieve that joint vision that we were discussing.
Thank you.
So there is no way we can achieve our climate ambitions if we don't take a serious look at the decarbonization of transport. And in this regard, the UN Decade of Action is a fantastic opportunity to elevate the visibility of our sector, to track how we are making progress toward clean, safe, inclusive, and resilient transport, and also how the regional disparities, global north, global south, is featured in this tracking. And above this, the main interest I see is the collaboration, the bringing all the partners together. We'll need the needs are enormous, and we'll need to unite our forces to move the needle. We've learned a lot from other Decade of Actions, the UN Decade of Actions for road safety, and so there are really lessons out there on how we can make it work.
Thank you, Nicholas. Anna?
Thank you very much. And it's been really interesting to hear the interventions of the other panelists, actually, and to reflect on the questions that came through as well. And I think maybe just 2 points from my point of view. So the first is just to emphasise that these challenges, as we've all said, are very much shared challenges, and there's a lot we can gain from sharing and collaborating. It's the same in the UK as well. It's really significant challenges. Our government's very committed to addressing them, but there's a lot we can do, and all of our progress is really interdependent. So just to make that point, I think the second point for us, and I think again reflecting on some of the conversation here, is really that integral link between transport and development. And a lot of the investments that we're making are about supporting other countries in Africa and Asia on developing their sustainable transport in the context of economic development, which I think speaks to the question raised earlier about jobs and prosperity as well. So I just wanted to close on that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the first panel. Please join me in giving a big hand to the panelists. Thank you very much. I now move on to the second panel discussions. So let me call upon the few colleagues. Or maybe before that, can you just stand up here and for a photo? All right, promptly we move on to the second panel. may I invite Miss Anna? Oh, sorry. May I invite Miss Rana Adif, good friend of mine, Executive Director, REN 21. Welcome, Rana. Mr. The Basvan Luven, Research Group Leader and Principal Research Scholar, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, IASA, welcome. Ms. Marusa Garudamar, Secretary General, SLOCAT, Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, welcome. And Ms. Marie Owens Thompson, Senior Vice President of Sustainability and Chief Economist, International Air Transport Association, IATA, welcome. Okay, so let's get started. Now we have heard some sort of good inputs into the designing of the decade and then a future vision of sustainable transport. So let's look into a little more details, priority setting, right? So we have two guiding questions. How should climate change be addressed in the implementation plan of the UN Decade of Sustainable Transport? How can the plan avoid thematic silos while highlighting priority action areas? So that's the first question. And the second question is, in what ways can the implementation plan benefit from foresight and scenario modeling to ensure forward-looking policy guidance? Those are the two guiding questions to guide your the discussions here. Who would like to start? Should I? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Very happy to go last equally. I was expecting to be a bit more formal, so but this is great. Thanks, Minoru. Well, above all, I want to do the formalities, which are more than formalities coming from SLOCAT. It's like, I think I really want to commend DESA and UN EC, the regional commissions, and also, of course, all the other regional commissions to convene us here for this conversation so we can really start planning together and also raising awareness about the decade. It's not banal and it's never easy to find moments to do these together. So the three guiding questions, I think, are very connected to what we heard in the first panel. And somehow I think that they place us in the thick of choosing what is the impact we want this decade to have, isn't it? And fundamentally, I think that is also one key message is about raising awareness of the fact that transforming transport systems and services is going to be one of the most impactful steps that the international community can take to transform our societies and our communities. And to do it in a moment in which we really need to transform our societies and our economies if we want to stay competitive, resilient, equitable, and all of that within a global warming that doesn't go beyond 1.5 Celsius degrees. So with all that, we need to interrogate a bit what is the impact that we would like the decade to have over the 10 years, isn't it? And how can we assess a bit what would be the KPIs of the results we could achieve over those 10 years. So we've been doing a bit of thinking because we are a partnership that reunites over 100 organizations, and we obviously benefit from that collective, isn't it, knowledge and that collective brain power. And we've put together some thoughts about what could be the 7 impacts that we could see if we want a decade to turbocharge commitment and action. And that has taken us, of course, to a very first one, which is about making sure that this is a conversation that engages all United Nations member states, that resonates with all geographies and with the different realities, so it can really help with the just transition conversations that we have in each country, on which transport is a very central sector. A second important impact for us would be, I think it resonates with what the first panel was telling us, is that it needs to issue a call to action and a clear pathway that is actually going to bring all the stakeholders together, from the customers that use transport services, whether it's freight or passenger transport services, to the service providers, to those who invest in those services, to those who provide infrastructure, to the communities that are using those services. And it's got to be a call to action that is going to be connecting transport to sustainability goals, to equity goals, to climate change goals, not just that keeps, say, transport in its very silo. We would love to see as well the decade generating the opportunity of locking in multilateral and multi-stakeholder cooperation to support national and subnational policies that are going to actually trigger transformation on the ground. We have to talk about monies as well. And of course, we know that the decade has been approved by the United Nations General Assembly without a specific budget for it. But we believe that the opportunity of working together over 10 years has got to help us lever better and more investment into sustainable low-carbon transportation solutions coming from the public sector and from the private sector as well, those monies. We also have to make sure that the decade, the work over the 10 years, is going to help us generate open data that are going to fill critical gaps, prevailing data gaps that are really hindering countries from taking sound, evidence-based decisions. Then we got, of course, the involvement of all stakeholders. I think we had from the first panel, I see Yari here, he was making that point very clearly, how we really need to make sure that this brings everyone along. But I could say not only within the transport sector, not only within us, but connecting us to those other stakeholders, all those other economy actors that work on health, that work on energy, that work on, the wider picture to which transport connects. And last but not least, we would hope as well that the decade could help us enhance as well interagency coordination within the United Nations and a bit more ministerial presence and engagement from ministers' transports, building upon the great work, of course, that the ITF is doing over the years, but bringing that as well into the United Nations throughout the decade. So when we look at how do you break the silos, of course, you can think, well, we can have as many pillars as modes you got in transport and organize the implementation plan of your decade across those pillars. That's the way of doing it. Our proposal is to look into perhaps priority areas for work over the decade that are encompassing a broader spectrum of topics that could be, addressable through cross-cutting lenses or also through the different modes of transport, public transport, rail, aviation, maritime, walking, cycling, you name it. And that would allow us to then be broken down at the regional priorities because the work through the regional commissions is essential. And that could also help us capitalize on the energy that exists already, encouraging multi-stakeholder initiatives that over the 10 years could keep the collaboration. And you can see behind on the screen, or probably just more than see it, sort of imagine behind on the screen a bit, what are the kind of areas that we are talking about. And this is the moment in which my iPad doesn't want to cooperate, even if I needed to. And I am sleep deprived, so I cannot remember the 6 areas. But basically, it's about connecting transport to the broader economic spectrum. It's about the right to affordable mobility as well. It's about transport and the energy transformation, the imperative of leaving fossil fuels behind. It's about decent jobs and livelihoods, so transport in the green economy. It's about the economics and the finance for transport. We know that there's a lot of things in the economics of transport that are really preventing us from transforming the sector. And last but not least, there is the capacity building, the institutional strengthening. You can see below each of these thematic areas how we can see, or how we think from Sloka that you could be looking through just broader spectrum themes like this. These are just 6 examples. We could have many others, goes without saying. But through broader spectrum themes, you could be addressing cross-cutting lenses and you could equally be addressing modes. So that's a bit where I'm going to stop it because I know that there's many other beautiful perspectives here brought at this panel. But thanks for the opportunity to break the ice, perhaps. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you very much. More than breaking the ice. Thank you so much. Who would like to go next? Rana? Oh, go ahead. Rana.
Actually, yes, I will. I think I'll go next just because I can so easily build on what Marusha said. But first of all, let me also congratulate UN DESA for this initiative and congratulate all speakers who were here before because I was very excited to hear that everybody of you referred to renewable energy. And if I think back 5 years ago, renewables was not really a topic that was mentioned in the transport sector. So sometimes it's good to look back and see the way we have gone. And I think I will basically give a bit of perspectives and sharing probably some entry points from the energy side and some learnings. And interestingly, Marusha, you spoke about how do we actually build economies and societies, right? And how does transport contribute to this? From the energy transition side, we come today to the point where we say it's not anymore about changing the fuel from fossil fuel to renewable energy, but it is about building the renewable energy economy. So moving away from the hydrocarbon economy or the fossil fuel economy to the renewable energy economy that will serve the society in a better way, in a sustainable way, in a resilient way, and the citizens for prosperity, because that's basically benefit. If we think about it like this, we actually realize that we need to build up the different economic activities or rethink the different building blocks of what is an economy. And obviously, and I think it was also mentioned before, supply chain security, transport, water, energy are foundations of the economy. We also have the foundations on finance, so economic activities, industrialization, investment, and trade. And I think the trade aspect is actually something that is really interesting. We see that trade is very often going along the infrastructure lines. And I think these are things where in the energy sector and in the transport sector, we have similarities actually. You had railways were offering trade. Today we're speaking from the energy side about the electric grids and corridors with regard to this. And here at the COP there has been a pledge basically on green zone corridors. Now, if you ask me how should this decade be clustered in a way that we do not create silos, I would actually say let's look at how these systems need to look like when we are looking at it globally, so global transport, regional, interregional, national and subnational. And obviously there are always the different transport modes and the different supply chains or not value chains. But I actually think that thinking in a regional approach really offers opportunity for better integration between energy infrastructure development, transport infrastructure development, but also the whole idea, because we heard about the job creation, it's also about building basically economic opportunities, industrialization, because it's also very clear that, and again, here we share very similarities between the transport and the energy sector. There is partly big dependence on certain countries. You see, like in the solar photovoltaics, for instance, China is the largest producer of panels. And there is a real question how we build up regional production and supply chains. I think we really share these aspects. So I also think it is about how do we build up industrial hubs that can be shared. Because the skilling, we will skill the workforce very differently tomorrow, because they will not be only transport experts or energy experts, etc. They will need to have a much more integrated understanding. And I think this is, the decade is really an opportunity to send foundations on this exactly by choosing another way of clustering at a meta level. And then, Minoru, you're also working obviously on the energy side. I think we're coming to the end of the decade on energy. This might be an opportunity to also kick off another way of thinking from the energy side and not having parallel processes, obviously, because we need parallel processes to also go deep, but also parallel processes that really think the connectors directly. And I'll come to the data part and I'll finish on this. Here I really think that we need to put a bit of effort on acknowledging that even though we're very interested in working together and see the synergies, it is not easy. We have seen it this year. We try really on the energy transport side very much. It was almost impossible to get transport players to the energy events and from the energy players to be at the transport events. Why? Because there are 150,000 events and the agenda is actually, at the end of the day, we go to energy because this is where we meet all the decision makers, and you go to transport. So I just think it also means that we need to build up basically the spaces where we can really work together and think together and shape together.
Thank you. Thank you, Lana. This is really just for information. General Assembly also is extending UN Decade of Sustainable Energy for until 2030. So this gives a perfect opportunity to actually synchronize, and really, let's looking forward to it. So, Bas, next to you.
Yeah, thank you. An extended decade, that sounds really interesting. I'm not sure what to start. Hope it doesn't turn into a century. Yeah, no. Does it work? Yeah. On these two questions, I think in order to avoid silos, it's really important to take a holistic view across both within the role of transport in the wider system, but also the role of transport in reaching all of the other SDGs. And for that, I was really happy to hear that the avoid, shift, improve method will be the basis for the report. But at the same time, usually in many studies, the avoid, shift, improve also creates its own silos where you think differently about urban planning, different modal shares and technology improvements. And then how those actually come together is often overlooked, or they go in different ways. And so in that sense, urge to how transport relates to other topics, like the use of materials and how the role of sharing. The mic seems to be. Yeah. And how the role of sharing and different sharing modes can help. Maybe it's dislocation. I thought the other speaker had it as well before me. I'll take it off. And I just talk and then I don't hear whether it's a problem or not. Then I just keep talking. So on the shared modes can really help to avoid material use. And we should really be careful, of course, if we go to electric vehicles, that we don't run into a model where everyone owns their own electric vehicle like we do with internal combustion engines, because our material use will be enormous. And so we need to rethink at the same time that we need to share these the vehicles much more, so that we go away from the ownership model to a shared model. The same with the business models and the role that transport has in economy. I really like the remark from Mr. Mariasin earlier this morning that of course it needs to be done in such a way that it's economically viable and implemented in such a way. But we should be careful that we don't let the status quo of business models that have a lot of implicit and unpriced externalities set the bar for what is economically viable. And so we also need to at the same time make rules to actually price the negative impacts of existing business models. Then when it comes to also scenarios and the role of transport in the rest of the system, there's not so many scenario work out there to build on, but I want to highlight work that we just published last week based on a long project looking at how in different ways and different pathways the same vision basically of a sustainable future can be reached. And here in these scenarios we developed 3 different scenarios in which all of the SDGs can be met through different approaches and entry points. So one entry point through green growth and having a very high growth, high urbanization, mega city technology approach to reaching all of these SDGs in parallel. Another one on resilient communities, where you build the systems around the small scale living scales of people and build upon the entry points basically of the civil society in developing a more sustainable future. And one on more managing the commons, where governments take the lead and you have different scales of and you have and take the lead in regulating basically how a sustainable future can be reached. And such scenarios can be really helpful, I think, to build on and create this more holistic view of not only reaching sustainable transport, but seeing the role of transport in a sustainable future. And I'll leave here a few leaflets to the study. So if you are interested in these pathways, there is a QR code on here that you can scan to actually go to the study itself and look to them more in depth. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So I too, of course, have to congratulate everybody on the inspirational decade for transportation, and of course we pin our hopes very much on this decade being an eye opener or a reminder to everybody of indeed the role that transportation plays and has played in human development. If we think from the very beginnings of humanity, we feel very connected with energy, obviously. There have been other very important ingredients to human development, but think anything transportation, everything from camels to internet, mobility and connectivity is a phenomenal driver of economic development, without which, necessary but not sufficient on its own, we would say as economists, right? This is absolutely necessary. Human development has always taken leaps thanks to progress in this space. And human development equally has always taken leaps thanks to developments in the energy sector. So from the first fires to where we are today, this is the other absolutely indispensable ingredient in human development, that people have access to energy. So I really welcome this decade if it allows the conversation about transportation to be seen in that light, whereas I feel that this has very much not been the case, maybe in particular in Europe. I also do not think that it's a government's place to make choices for consumers. As an economist, again, we have seen that welfare is maximized where people can have ample and free choice between many good alternatives, and then they can themselves optimize which choice they make. This is obvious. This reality also speaks to what Rana said about regions. Yes, we can have a regional situation where certain choices might make more sense than others, and other regions where completely different realities make completely different choices absolutely necessary. I think what we should try to do at the global level is, of course, try to make all forms of transportation, all forms of mobility cheaper, accessible, and sustainable, and faster and better in every way. And this is the best way that we can meet all the SDGs and maybe even have a chance at eradicating poverty. Yeah? The 20th century was an amazing century for human development built on fossil fuels, let's admit it, right? So this century is complicated. I hope that the next century is going to be built on renewable energies and will free the world from its energy constraint. And that, I think, is an absolutely amazing thing to try to work for on a daily basis. So that's how we see ourselves in aviation. Yeah. So we do think holistically and systemically. We do see ourselves as part of course, the transportation sector, but we are here to get out of the silos. We are totally here to make friends with all the other people involved in the global energy transition. Although I cannot resist the opportunity to point out that aviation is both the fastest and the safest mode of transportation in the world today. So I think that what we are seemingly lacking in the world today, which is quite astonishing given that this is COP29, what we seem to be lacking is unity of minds and clarity of purpose. And when we try to address these issues in a siloed fashion, we know for sure that we will fail. So the top priority is, of course, I beg your forgiveness for using this phrase. The top priority is, of course, to meet the SDGs and eradicate poverty. The fastest way to do so is to replace fossil fuels with alternative sustainable energy. And we do everything that we can in our industry to promote this, even if the solutions lie outside of our industry. Yeah. So I have one more specific point to make about aviation. We are ruled on the global scale by ICAO, the UN Special Agency for Civil Aviation. ICAO made an inspirational decision in 2016 before anybody else, to create a market-based system for offsetting for international aviation. This is called CORSIA. Airlines have to pay money, buy offsets under CORSIA. This is the UN telling us to do so, and of course we shall abide. But this group of people, the UNFCCC, seemingly were not aware. So while we have an obligation to buy these offsets, the countries do not have an obligation to free the credits for the use of aviation. This is Article 6 in the negotiations here. So countries have optionality. We have an obligation. Therefore, we are also here to make friends with as many countries as possible and ask all of these countries to please, please, please release the credits for the use of aviation so that we can oblige and comply with our obligations under CORSIA. And of course, we have a similar situation regarding sustainable aviation fuel, which can also be used under CORSIA. And we stand ready and have so far as an industry bought every drop of sustainable aviation fuel produced, but there is not enough of it. So we want to comply, we want to decarbonize, we want to advance, but we are unfortunately not given the solutions at the scale that we need them as fast enough. So we are also here to accelerate, hopefully all of us together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. We'll be opening up for questions and answers.
Minuru, may.
Yes, and then I'll come back and then I give the floor back to Rana. But I know I'm giving sort of give a warm up a little bit, so I'll come back to the floor for questions. Rana, before this.
Yeah, sorry, because I think I would like to just put out one number again from the energy side, and I think this shows us that we really need to have different entry points. Is transport is representing 30% in total final energy consumption, and only 4% today is renewables. It is the sector that is lacking the most behind all other sectors. And building on this, even though I obviously fully agree with you that we need to shift and replace fossil fuel with renewables, we will not move to a renewable-based economy and renewable-based transport if we do not significantly reduce the energy consumption. And this obviously comes down also to obviously active mobility, public transportation, electrifying basically the sectors, and when we're looking at the fuel side in a comprehensive way, then shifting some of the fuels, so biofuels, sustainable aviation fuels, electricity, to the sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize, but need to decarbonize. So this was one aspect which I think is really important. And then also, since both of you spoke about economics and also taxation or the offsetting market, I just think it's a reality when we're speaking about how does a new economy need to look like and need to take into account these different solutions and sustainability. It is a reality that our economic system today is actually not pointing us to the right solutions. It is not, because the external costs are not reflected, because the benefits the different modes bring or the different energy solutions bring are not reflected, and also because the avoided costs by not investing in adaptation and in climate resilience are not reflected. And I think this is something which we will see increasingly, and we will need to change the overall economic system and reflect those things, because otherwise we might not be able, and I mean we're here to help humanity address climate change, right? We might not be able to address the incumbents that are deeply anchored in our current economy and are fossil fuel driven. That's unfortunately a reality.
I will give the floor to Marusha, but if there are any, I would like to also bring the audience into this one. Any questions, any comments as well at this point in time from the floor? If not, then I will continue. Marusha, would you like to start? And then Mary, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity of coming back a second time. We are at a UN FCCC venue. The question was about how do we integrate climate change and transport. And building upon the point you just made, Rana, I think that it'll be an imperative that the decade of sustainable transport helps us understand as well what are the different impacts that different modes of transport generate on society at large and on the environment. And that is at the core of the economics that are working or not working for transport right now. So not all modes are equal in terms of the impact they have on people, the environment, current generations and future generations. And I think that that's part of what the decade can help us unpack, preserving the very fundamental goal of having as many mobility choices, as many transport choices as possible, and making sure that those choices reflect the needs for development of each country. But at the very core is economics, and economics right now are not working. And I don't think it's me who's saying it. I would just point us to the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force that was convened by three rather remarkable figures: President Ruto from Kenya, President Mia Motley from Barbados, and President Macron from France. They bring together three different processes that have been occurring over the past years. The Bridgetown Initiative, isn't it, about reforming international development and international financial architecture, the first African Climate Summit hosted in Nairobi, and the summit that President Macron hosted in Paris to help us continue the conversations about reforming the international financial system and the architecture. And their indications is their words, it's not mine. I invite you to read, for instance, what they wrote on an op-ed in Project Syndicate on the 8th of November. They are indicating that there are swathes of the economy that are largely untaxed, but are provoking quite some impacts on people and planet. They are pointing at maritime, at aviation, at fossil fuels, at international transactions, at plastics, and they are announcing that they have already gathered 13 countries that are going to be looking at that notion of solidarity levies, coming up with very specific proposals. Last week they already put forward some proposals that are coming with rather important impact assessments that are showing how, by putting specific levies that are not particularly huge in terms of the overall cost of moving goods or extracting fossil fuels, that we should not be doing, but if we keep on doing, at least let's make sure that, you know, they are used for a global transformation in a just transition. They are showing how, by using that notion of solidarity levies, we could be raising part of the monies that currently we are lacking in the climate finance conversation. So I think that there is an intersection here, transformation that we would like the UN decade to, and at the very core is economics and understanding what is the underlying causes that are not allowing us to transform systems of transport in the way we need. Difficult conversations. They are not one size fits all. There's not going to be one conversation per mode only. There's not going to be one conversation per country only. There's not going to be one conversation per region in the world only, but I think that they are essential. Otherwise, the decade is just going to be business as usual, and by 2035, we're just going to have exactly the same issues that we have today and exactly the same lack of integrated perspectives on intermodal systems across passenger and freight. So that's a bit the call, and I promise not to...
No, thank you very much, Mary.
Yes, I don't know. I don't feel particularly targeted, but I want to point out again, for the sake of clarity, that aviation is overseen by the UN Special Agency for Civil Aviation, ICAO, since the Second World War. Yeah, and we are facing obligations that you know, we don't call them tax, but that will obviously require airlines to pay for offsets, which we are happy to do, and superimposing yet another system on the existing rules for civil aviation is problematic. I can see how it can, but I think there needs to be a recognition of the existence of ICAO. And since we're speaking of economics, I also think that it's important that we understand that our industry, our whole industry, is probably going to make 30 billion profit this year. 30 billion profit is what any self-respecting oil company makes in 1 quarter. Single company quarterly profit. Our industry makes this, the whole industry, in 1 year. This equates to a 3% net profit margin, and it also equates to $6 per passenger. Yeah. So this compares to, of course, the often 20% profit margin in the fossil fuel sector, for instance. And so that's one problem. The other problem is the relative attractiveness of these investment opportunities. So if you're an investor wanting to get involved in the energy sector, you can look on the one side and then maybe think that if you invest in fossil fuels, you can earn these 20% profit margins in a space that is known and understood, and although it's a bit volatile, the risks are perfectly well managed since many, many decades. And on the other side, you look at sustainable aviation fuel with a regulatory environment that is volatile, to say the least, and you know, lots of uncertainty surrounding that many of those technologies. There's basically one today that is commercially viable. And of course, I don't know what the profit margins are on that side because it's a private market. All the deals are between, private entities, and they do not disclose. It's not a mature, transparent market. So I can only speculate that their profit margins are single digits, maybe mid-single digits if I be generous. So all we have to do is look at the stock market performance. Which stocks are performing well today? Obviously, energy stocks, and what's happening to the renewable energy stocks? Well, they are clearly underperforming. So we need help from the regulators to change the fundamental investment proposition, make it attractive to invest in renewable energies in general for everybody. And we just want the share that aviation will need to be able to fly airplanes as long as we're flying combustion engine propelled airplanes.
Thank you very much, Mary. We are coming closer to the end of this panel. Unless we have any additional the interventions from the floor, I invite one intervention, 1 minute remarks, final points from each of the panel members before we close. Bas, would you like to do it? Thank you.
Yes, I can start. I think this. This discussion highlights that while we might agree on a point on the horizon of what that sustainable future system looks like, there's very different ways of going about that through economic entry points, through regulatory entry points, or through civil society entry points. And different aspects of reaching the SDGs will be easier or harder in going in through these different entry points. Eradicating poverty in a post-growth is really hard because you need to do a lot of redistribution to make that work. On the other hand, limiting resource use in such world might be much easier. And so I think refer again to the scenario work that we did here, basically to really point out the three really different approaches that we can take in reaching that point on the horizon where we all want to be, and finding the language to have this conversation with each other to make that future happen in the end.
Thank you. Rana?
So I think from the discussion we see that there are tension points, right, which we need to address. And from Rent on one side, we have done together with many transport players also a Global Futures report on the role of renewable energy in sustainable transportation. And we have identified some of those tension points. I think it's really important that we create the space where we can have the discussion around those. Because on the other side, we also see that we have lots of common realities. We speak about infrastructure, we speak about services, we speak about clients, we speak about investment, we speak about moving away from a fossil fuel, maybe an automotive industry, to other fuels on the renewable side, and transport modes on the transport side. We also all need to acknowledge that we have resource scarcity, so we won't get there if we do not reduce our consumption and then replace basically a move to cleaner fuels. So I think my ask to UN DESA is using basically the UN Decade for Sustainable Transport. No, I think it's called differently, but you know what I mean. Sorry, just, okay, good. To really also create those spaces where we can bring those perspectives together. Because what I observe, and I think it's really interesting, I would love to invite you to some of our renewable energy events so that they hear this, because what we also observe is in the renewable space, we often hear, the transport players should look where they get their energy from. I exaggerate deliberately. But in the transport field, I hear very often, yes, but you need to work on your supply and to move it. The reality is we won't get there if we spend 10 years of finger pointing and don't sit jointly around the table to find the solutions. Even if it's hard, but we need to do this work.
Thank you.
Acknowledging that I spoke a lot already, I'm going to try to keep it to the 1 minute. And my takeaway is that let's make this decade a decade that is not just for us, the transport professionals, or not just for the transport ministries, though of course we need them, or not just for the different transport modes, but let's make this decade a decade that places transport at the core of economic development, at the core of the discussion about jobs, energy transition, health, and the sort. If we manage this decade to help us connect with the broader sustainability and development goals, we would have already achieved a ton. And I think it links to the point about how do we help implement SDGs by connecting transport to the wider picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to say
For a short of time, I'm happy to go with your closing comments.
Thank you very much. And then this is the end of the second panel. This was engaging and also very entertaining discussion. So please join me in thanking with big hands to the panel members. Yes. This also marks the end of the first session in the series of 3 events that we are doing today, focused on sustainable transport, marking the beginning of the conversation toward sustainable transport decade starting 2026. So we have 1 year of conversation to design perfectly, and then I think we got a lot of good insights to actually, start cooking something. And I hope that everybody will join in this conversation over the next several months to make sure we make best out of this decade. Thank you very much. And we'll be back in the second event at 10:45. Thank you so much. Thank you.